Good evening, Talking Jazz webinar attendees and panelists. I'm Howard Mandel, President of the Jazz Journalists Association, coming to you from Chicago via the Jazz Journalists Association's headquarters in the cloud. Tonight, Jazz Radio in Transition, Turning into the Future. This is the 10th of the JJA's online webinar panel series, Talking Jazz, which is presented by the Jazz Cruise as part of its Anita E. Berry Jazz Education Fund. And I should say that all Talking Jazz webinars and panels are archived for free access by the Jazz Journalists Association at YouTube. If you want to see the entire schedule of the JJ's educational sessions for jazz journalists and for others who want to use media to promote jazz or anything, go to members.jazzjournalist.org, members.jazzjournalist.org, click on Talking Jazz Recordings. But if you are watching live, you're invited to type in questions or comments in the chat box on your screen, and I'll try to get those questions and comments into the discussion at an appropriate moment. Though we may be not doing that until the first hour of this chat is over. Our entire webinar will be 90 minutes. Now let me introduce our stellar panelists. Tonight's panelists are three leaders in jazz radio, and I hasten to convey the regrets of Katya Stitt, the interim program director at WPFW, who had to deal with last-minute family conflict. She's not going to make it. We will have Katya on a subsequent webinar. But we do welcome Arturo Gómez, music director of KUVO-Denver. He's also been a program host of Lunchtime at the Oasis. He's been at KUVO for 11 years and formerly was a principal at Miami's jazz radio stations. Katie Simon, senior producer for National Public Radio at WBGO, and she's the senior producer of national programming at WBGO and the producer of NPR's new series Jazz Night in America. Prior to that, she was a senior producer for StoryCorps, and she also wrote a lot for JazzSet with Dee Dee Bridgewater, the prior NPR signature jazz series. And finally, not least, Jim Wilkie, who is a JJ Jazz hero. He's the winner of our Willis Conover Murray McFarland Award for Excellence in Jazz Broadcasting. He recently retired from 30 years of hosting Jazz After Hours, which was nationally syndicated from Seattle by Public Radio International. And Jim continues to host Jazz Northwest, which highlights regional music and activity. Jim has also done the bulk of work for me tonight by coming up with several excellent topics which we're going to take up in this webinar. And the first of these is, are we in a period of transition away from traditional terrestrial broadcast radio? Are we in a period of transition away from traditional broadcast radio, or are we maybe developing new kinds of terrestrial-based broadcasts that reach out to other media, including maybe video webcasts or interactions with listeners, maybe through side chats, on-demand programs? Is this the trend today, moving away from our conventions of jazz radio? Katie, maybe you'd start.
I don't know that I have the numbers to say whether or not it's a trend. I can certainly say that it's what we're trying to address through Jazz Night in America, the entire program that we're putting together, which is sort of simultaneously a radio program and a traditional hour radio program that is on about 150 stations across the country. And then in addition to that, we NPR is sort of was doing all of this stuff to begin with, but it wasn't a cohesive program, but are doing field recordings at festivals, trying to get, groups into interesting places that are interesting visually, having them do some special performances for us, and then also capture the concerts that we're capturing for the radio program on video and presenting those either live or as live on npr.org. So I would say that if it's a trend, we're trying to hop on board or maybe to start it, but we're trying to give people access to the music sort of in every way, shape, and form that they might want to consume it. I personally love listening the best. Like, I don't know that I need a visual, but you know, for some people it makes all the difference. So we're trying to reach everybody.
Arturo, how do you stand on that? Where is KUVO on this?
Well, eventually, I would say 3 to 5 years. We don't know what the state of terrestrial radio will be because it's obviously in transit now. We still have an overwhelming amount of our listenership tied into traditional radio, in particular during morning and evening rush hours, because the car is still the very important spot for terrestrial radio. That could change very soon due to the fact that many car manufacturers will start to include, online radio signals in the cars because they'll have the Bluetooth or whatever technology is required that you could be driving around, for instance, here in Denver, and even without a phone or a laptop and listen to WBGO. So it's definitely changing, but for right now, terrestrial radio, in my opinion, is still very valuable.
And Jim, what are your thoughts on this? And why did you ask this question to begin with?
Well, I see it as an evolving thing, of course, as the others have mentioned. My history in radio goes back to when it was really wireless. Remember radio, wireless radio? The interesting thing is that increasingly, as Arturo mentioned, with Bluetooth and phones being able to download radio stations and virtual dashboards and so on, I think it's even going to be making entry into car radio listening at traffic times. The one thing that terrestrial radio has always offered that isn't offered by some of these other programming is the fact that it's immediacy. It's being able to report on a traffic situation that's going on right at the moment. Also, in the immediacy of a live broadcast. I do a lot of location recording. I've done a lot of live broadcast right up the line onto the transmitter kind of broadcasting, and those are really exciting. And you know, the NPR New Year's Eve coast to coast is always exciting from that reason. And I did some shows for NBC radio back in the day when NBC was doing the New Year's Eve show coast to coast, preceded NPR. Those have a kind of excitement that it's hard to achieve in any other form, and I would like to see that form of terrestrial radio and live broadcasting continue. That's always been a major interest of mine. But for now, I just see it opening up in all kinds of directions and so many choices that it's hard to build an audience in any of them because the audience is so divided over so many different platforms.
Katie, do you see that as being a problem for Jazz Night, that you have divided the audience because people are looking in different ways at different places, different times?
You know, I hope not. What I was going to say is that I really agree that I think that there's an energy and an excitement of live radio that is almost impossible to replicate, you know, through a podcast or streaming or sort of any other method of consuming it. And I was wondering if maybe that's how it'll end up. Maybe there can be more actual live radio happening, and then if you want to consume something that's not live, you know, you would have another method of accessing that. So, I mean, I don't know that it's a concern of ours, but I also, frankly, haven't really thought about splitting the audience in that way right now, because our show is not a live. It's, you know, our show is not a live broadcast of a concert. It still is. It is, and it has always been. The jazz shows on NPR have been pre-produced shows. The New Year's Eve, which I've actually been a part of for many, many years, I agree is, I think, one of the most exciting radio experiences that I've ever done.
The broadcast from Newport Jazz Festival was live too, wasn't it? It has been in years past. It was not this past year, though. The Folk Festival, I believe, was live, but the Jazz Festival this year was not done live. But previously it had been, yes. Arturo, is there live broadcasts from KUVO?
Well,
maybe for the 5 Points Festival?
we do have a monthly scholastic series where we have live performances from our performance studio, be it a high school or collegiate band, and even on occasion a middle school band. Also, throughout the year, we have professional musicians performing, be it nationally known artists, as well as our local musicians performing live in our studios. When one of our musicians passes away, we always hold jam sessions in honor of that musician. And so live broadcast of performances is an integral part of KUVO, and it always has been and always will be. But back for a moment, if I may, to terrestrial radio, whether we remain terrestrial radio in the traditional sense or become strictly an online radio station, one thing that will never be duplicated by national outlets online for jazz is locality. Being here in Denver and reporting about Denver, as Jim mentioned, traffic conditions on the moment and about events happening here. Jim knew that because when he hosted his program, he always included a calendar of jazz events, not only for Seattle, but for other cities across the country. And that's the tie-in to the local community that other national or international online broadcasts for jazz cannot duplicate. And that will always be something that will make the local jazz stations or local stations, regardless of format, be something necessary for that area. We get many emails and messages from former Denverites living throughout the world that love listening to us online because we're reporting what's going on in their former hometown or former place of residence. That's something that cannot be eliminated, and that's the key for stations to retain their local audience.
And one thing I just wanted to add to that is that one of the things that we're trying to do with the Wednesday night webcasts for Jazz Night in America is really take people to that local level, you know, because we're going to be traveling all over the country, and we're really hoping to give people access to exactly what you're talking about, to these sort of niche markets where people are just never going to get there otherwise. So we're really excited about that.
Do you see that as a rival? Is that competition to you, Arturo, when you hear Katie say that? Or is that an add-on for you?
I don't find it as competition. I mean, honestly, and maybe this is a bit, of braggadocio in me, I don't believe we have competition when it comes to the local scene. Now, we do have competition for audiences wanting to listen to jazz. Naturally, that's a divided audience because there are so many outlets. On our weekend specialty programs that we're not playing jazz, we know that we have listeners either going to our HD2 channel or HD3 channel or going to another outlet to listen to jazz.
So in a way, this is the best of both worlds because you've got your localized programming, and I noticed that there's bilingual programming on KUVO. You have a show, Canción Mexicana. You have a Latin soul party, La Nueva Voz. So you are serving a local community that way. On the other hand, people all over the world can also go on to KUVO online, and you have a much larger audience potentially that way.
That is true. We're a community station. We're not a public radio station per se. We're not part of a university or other organization. We're an independent community public radio station. And the founders of the station back in 1985 always wanted to maintain a reflection of the community in which we live in on the station. So we have these specialty programs, and these specialty programs are of music that cannot be found on the commercial dial, such as the one you mentioned, Canción Mexicana, which is the highest rated Sunday morning show in the entire state of Colorado, whether it be public community or even commercial airwaves. And we have a golden age of R&B show on Saturday night. That's our second highest rated program, because very few stations, even less than jazz, play the golden era of R&B music of the late 40s through the early 60s, which is the roots of rock and roll. So these specialty programs, which are really in English with ethnic music, because they're not conducted in Spanish, even Canción Mexicana, attract audiences of every background because they like the music.
I just want to follow up for a moment on the question about live broadcasts and ask you, Arturo, do you get response from your listenership that they're excited about live broadcasts? Is that a special thing as far as you can tell for your listenership?
Oh, absolutely. We even have what is called a studio club, where members who come on board at a certain level of yearly contribution are invited 20, 25, 30 times a year when we have live broadcasts to come into the studio and see these performances. So yes, there's overwhelming support for live music here at KUVO.
Jim, let's now switch back to the regional issue, because you, while you were being syndicated from Seattle by PRI, were addressing both a national audience and doing it from not admittedly, but a notably regional platform. I mean, from Seattle, as opposed to being we're national in that way. Isn't that the case?
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question, Howard. Could you rephrase that?
Yeah, it seems like you were both addressing a national audience, but trying not to lose your location, being in Seattle.
Okay.
And so you're sort of balancing both the national and the local in those broadcasts. Right.
Well, I think the Seattle scene, in a lot of senses, is becoming a new focal point for jazz. I think a lot of people are aware. There's a lot of New York musicians now that are former Seattleites, and I think Seattle's gaining in recognition from that standpoint. But I also made it a point to talk about the individual areas in which the show was broadcast, and to frequently mention what was going on in those areas and play artists from those areas, and sort of make the show a national bulletin board in that sense, so that while it was a national show, it had a local focus as well, because we played people from Honolulu, we played people from upstate New York, we played people from the Denver, Colorado area and all around. So yeah, we made a real effort to have it be both ways, both national and local from that standpoint. My present show that I'm doing focuses on the Northwest regional scene, and that takes in not only Seattle but also Vancouver, BC, and the lower mainland of Canada, as well as the upper part of Oregon and Portland, and there's quite an active scene. Interestingly enough, Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver all have very different flavor of scenes, so it makes for a great deal of variety. I started out doing a lot of local live recording for the show, because there weren't many commercial recordings available, but now there's been an explosion of material that's come from all three cities, and there's no shortage of material on CD. But I'm still getting out there and doing a lot of local recording as well.
Katie, when you're going to go to different cities for Jazz Night in America, how do you do your research for what to hone in on?
Wow, that's a huge question. I mean, one of the things, we haven't started traveling very much yet, so it's something that we're working on with a big group at NPR, but we're planning and hoping to work with local stations in order to develop programming, because, as everyone here has just pointed out, they're incredibly tapped into their local communities and the jazz scene that's happening there, and we want to know what they're excited about, and we want to be able to feature some of that on Jazz Night in America, because one of the things that we're trying to do is obviously feature, you know, the best performers around the country, but I'm also really interested in on a national level helping people in New York know what's going on in Denver that they might never have heard about and get really, really excited about it. So the research is, the research is pretty epic, but we will be reaching out and have started reaching out to stations across the country to figure out what we can agree on together will be the best performance to highlight.
Katie, can I come in here for a moment? That's a great idea, and I really like to see you expand upon that. I did some shows for JazzSet earlier from this area, and I think that's a very valuable resource. All the stations out there that have good local scenes to be able to submit material for you or to consider material. I worked with Branford. I worked with Dr. Billy Taylor on some earlier shows in this long-running series that has evolved through several different stages. But great idea. I'd like to see you explore that some more.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really earnest endeavor to say, from America. It would be very easy in many ways to do a show from New York, right? And promote it as a national show, but we really want to know what's going on in every corner. I'm really excited to get to some cities that a lot of people would not necessarily associate with jazz, and find out what's going on there, find out who's performing there that everybody loves.
Very cool.
Will the productions actually be collaborative? It sounds like Jim was talking about providing shows.
Yeah, I mean, I think that all has to be hashed out. I don't know that I can fully answer that question, but we're trying to be as collaborative as possible. That's the spirit in which this whole program has been born, as a collaboration between WBGO and Jazz at Lincoln Center and NPR. So, yes. But I can't speak to the specifics of that.
Arturo, has KUVO ever been part of the New Year's Eve broadcast, the big NPR coast-to-coast broadcast?
We've had, I think, 3, perhaps 4 segments of the national countdown here in Denver. Our biggest highlight was when we had Eddie Palmieri countdown to midnight here in Denver, and we've done 2 or 3 others as well. And then Josh from WBGO was here during the Democratic Convention that took place here in Denver, and we had a live broadcast with David Amram and many, many others as well.
Josh Jackson.
Exactly. Who used to be with OZ.
Right. Much
we have
missed.
a thriving live jazz scene here in Denver.
Yeah, right. So, this sort of leads to the question about what the audiences expect, what your audiences expect, and are they turning in to your broadcast thinking this is appointment listening? I know that Jazz Night in America is on live with the video broadcast Wednesday night only, or I know that Arturo is doing the lunchtime at this hour, and I always want to be there listening to him. Or Jim, Jazz Northwest is on at this hour. Or are listeners expecting that whenever they want to hear you, they ought to be able to just turn you on, and there you are? Is that the trend of the future, that, content ought to be here for me when I want it? Or is it, I'm going to wait until this show is on, and then I'm going to turn it on?
I'll speak to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Me too.
Okay. KPLU, which carries Jazz Northwest, has it both ways. It's a live it's broadcast appointment tuning at 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoons. And so every Sunday afternoon people tune in and listen to it. However, as soon as the broadcast is over, it's available as a podcast at kplu.org. So if people miss it, say, dang, it's 3 o'clock, I missed the show. They can go to the podcast and listen to it immediately. So they have it both ways.
We're not quite there yet. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead. I'll speak after you.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
We're not quite there yet. We are working on having on-demand for our programs. We do have 2, maybe 3 of our specialty weekend programs available for rebroadcast on our HD2 signal. But we are in the process, hopefully by the summer of next year, that not only will we be broadcasting, of course, live from the studio, be it a performance or recorded music, that these programs and the shifts of the different on-air hosts would then be available for on-demand listening. But we're not quite there yet.
Do you approach sponsors or underwriters with that as an opportunity for them? Is that a good pitch to your sponsors to be able to say, you know, we'd like to push on-demand listening. This would be a new thing for the station we could open up, and why don't you get behind that? Is that attractive?
It will be when we are ready to have it on demand, but since we're not there yet, it's a hard pitch. It's a hard sell. And the sponsors that we have and our underwriters are mostly small, independent, either presenters of music or cultural agencies and organizations. So we don't have any major corporate sponsorship. So it's not that they're in a position to finance the conversion over to having everything on demand. But we're doing it on our own. We're raising funds and setting it aside for that project. And again, we hope that by the summer of 2015, we will begin to offer, if not all of our on-air broadcast on demand, a good portion of it, especially the specialty programs and anything where an interview came in. Let's say, you know, we had Thomas Marriott in the studio, we were interviewing him. Then that definitely is something we want to be able to offer on demand as fast as possible.
Katie, does the NPR hookup enable WBGO to expand its on-demand offerings?
I don't know that I can fully answer that, but I think the short answer is no. I mean, WBGO has a blog and archives material online extensively, and also we do live studio recordings. And you know, WBGO is very much the host station for this, for Jazz Night in America. But it's, I mean, WBGO. There's a whole other conversation to have. With Simon Rentner, who's producing the checkout out of WBGO, about all of the, you know, the studio recordings and the stuff that's being made available that's simply WBGO content on demand and also live on air. You know, Jazz Night in America is attempting to reach everybody in the way that they want to consume the music. So it is appointment listening on Wednesday nights. You know, we hope to get people really excited about that and really feel like they can attend this live concert event. And then the radio show complements it in the sense that it's obviously excerpting, it's not broadcasting the entire concert, and it's providing some more context for the music. And then that's available also on npr.org if you've missed the program. So theoretically, you could watch Wednesday night and listen to the radio program, and it wouldn't be completely repetitive. You would actually have a different experience for both of those events, even if it's the same concert.
And the live chat, I mean, is the chat live again later?
The chat is only live on Wednesday night for that concert.
Right, of course. Yeah. Let me just break in and let the audience know that you're listening to the Talking Jazz webinar series from the Jazz Journalists Association. This is Jazz Radio in Transition, Turning into the Future. We're talking to Jim Wilkie, Katie Simon, Arturo Gómez. I'm Howard Mandel. This is being brought to you by the Jazz Cruise as part of its Anita E. Berry Jazz Education Fund. So, picking up on the conversation, where were we? What about audio quality issues? Is that something that particularly concerns you, Katie, as you're doing these? I mean, it must.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I know people listen on various devices, and certainly you're not getting the same experience if you're listening, you know, in an iPod or, you know, from little speakers in a computer as you would be from something else. But no, I mean, audio quality and the highest audio quality is absolutely of the utmost importance to us. So we're going to keep putting that out there, and hopefully people will experience it that way too.
Jim, you asked this question whether audio quality issues still reign as important. What is your thought on that?
Yeah, well, we had a thing called broadcast quality one time, and broadcast quality was extremely important to us. But then with the oncoming portability issue, then broadcast quality seemed to sort of take a back seat to portability. And I think with iPods and MP3s and portable devices, people love the portability of it, and I think that the broadcast quality issue is sort of taking a back seat. I do see on the horizon, however, greater interest in getting back to better quality sound. And I'm hoping that that trend continues, because that is really, I think it's a big part of the experience. I've been listening to some higher than usual quality delivering systems for over the internet, where you can actually download better than CD quality, better than broadcast quality, and I think that's really significant. The other thing that I've noticed, and this is something that's sort of a personal war with me, is the loudness issue. There are so many stations that are dealing with so much compression in their signal. It's great for talk radio, but boy, it's murder on music. I hear some things that just turn the dynamics inside out. The soft passages are all loud, the loud passages are all soft, and it's a considerable annoyance. It's very ear fatiguing for me to listen to that kind of broadcast. In some cases, I've actually found that podcasts can sometimes sound better from that respect than broadcasts. They may be more limited in frequency response, but at least the dynamics are still there. This is something I would really like to see more engineering people pay more attention to. Yeah, it's loud. Its average loudness is louder than it's ever been, but it doesn't sound like real music anymore because of this inside-out sort of dynamics that's going on.
Arturo, are you having issues about that at KUVO? Is this something that you go through with your engineers?
Not really. We were the first HD broadcast station in the state of Colorado, and we've always had a national reputation for quality signal broadcasting due to the great engineers we have had in the past and the equipment that we have, all top shelf equipment. So our sound is, above average, even for commercial stations. We have prohibited hosts from playing any downloaded music, any MP3s or other downloaded music, because of the fact that the frequency range, as Jim explained, doesn't reach the quality of a traditional broadcast. And the proof of this, that for the past 2 years, record sales, vinyl, has outsold CDs, because it is the youth that are now buying vinyl over CD, because they have realized in listening to portable devices, they're missing out on the entire spectrum of the music experience, the highs and the lows. CDs sound a little bit too tinny. They're discovering what the baby boomer generation has always known, that LPs played on a good system are much warmer than CDs. And they have improved over the original printing of CDs back in the late 80s and early 90s, but, they're still not quite the same. And we are now broadcasting downloaded music from our hard drives, because more and more we're ripping the CD we're receiving onto a hard drive, because CD players and broadcast CD players are no longer being manufactured. So once the CD players that we have go kaput, we have no other choice but to play downloaded music from our hard drive. But those are linear downloads, and they sound exactly the same as the CD.
Arturo, I noticed that, and you mentioned before, that KUVO has 2 other streams of broadcasting also, besides your main. And this is in part for mobile, 4 apps?
Well, it's available two ways. The HD radio receiver, which has been a complete fiasco and never really took off, neither in automobiles nor for people buying the components to take it home and then click on HD2 or HD3. But where it has been successful is on streaming, because when you log on to KUVO, we give you the option of which one of our signals, the primary, the secondary, and tertiary signals that we have. And even on mobile devices, you can also select from the different channels that we have. When we're broadcasting our specialty programs, our secondary signal has jazz. When we're broadcasting jazz throughout most of the week, our secondary signal has NPR talk shows and news shows. And then our third signal is what we call the other side of KUVO, which is an eclectic mix of all sorts of music, ranging from jazz to lounge to smooth and other music forms.
Is that your responsibility to oversee all 3 of those channels programming?
Well, the third channel is done by one of our volunteers and on-air hosts, who's an IT guy, and this is his little plaything, and we give him full access to the tertiary signal to do as he wishes, and has become very successful. The secondary signal is automated, and we just program the NPR programs and those very few specialty programs that we repeat on our secondary signal. But it's all automated, so there's no input by me necessary.
Let's see. A couple comments from our attendees. This is Kara Gaffney. She really likes the idea of going out to not so well-known towns and exploring the jazz scene. I think this is for you, Katie. We traveled for 5 years straight on the road, and we were regularly amazed at how well attended small-town jazz shows were, because in truth there are not as many shows to choose from. There's a plethora of jazz going on in many, many towns. What an amazing idea to cultivate jazz through a national show. But that's the point of view of a touring musician. Katie, would you pick up a touring musician show in some place considered a secondary or tertiary market, or would you be looking for the artists who are based in those markets?
I think both. I think to expect the national, as the national program, we want to be broadcasting the best and brightest jazz every week, period. I think that we want to be doing that from every inch of the country. And I think sometimes that might mean highlighting a festival in a city. Going to the Portland Jazz Festival, for example, might be something we think about doing. In which case, we may or may not be highlighting a local Portland artist, or maybe we would be doing that in addition to highlighting somebody who is known as a national artist. So I really think it's both. I think it will depend on the situation, it'll depend on the concert, and it'll depend on the story that we have to tell. I think sometimes people might really want to hear about people who are lesser known and explore something new, and other times, we're really honored and excited to broadcast, the most famous people out there. So I'm hoping that we can have a really good mix and just make sure we're getting people amazing music.
JJA member Robin Lloyd of KPLU Seattle reminds us of the NPR show Jazz Alive, produced by Tim Owens. Didn't they travel the country and feature live, live, pre-produced local jazz artists? Is that a model for Jazz Night in America also?
I think everything that's come before is a model. We're sort of drawing. We're trying on all of the shows to a certain extent that have existed. We are, to a certain extent, jazz profiles, to a certain extent, JazzSet, to a certain extent, piano jazz, trying to incorporate a little bit more storytelling and conversations into our shows. So I wouldn't say that any single one is a model, but we're trying to use you know, what worked best in all of those shows, and have it be something where people really get the music and get the context and the history behind the music as well.
This is a perfect segue into another of Jim's suggested topics that we take up. How much does talking about music do to encourage listening to the music? Is it as valuable to be talking about this music for the audiences? Is that drawing the audience, or do they just want to hear full-length performances and they don't want chatter? What do you think? Is the personality of the DJ going to be something that is sustained and built upon as we're going forward in jazz radio, or do people just want to hear streaming music and that's pretty much it? Arturo, you picked this up to begin with.
Okay, well, that's what distinguishes a radio station from an online music service, is the fact that a host will interject his comments, his take on the music, as well as identifying the music. A lot of online music services do not identify the music. Oh, they may have the scroll across the screen letting you know. But the key is, because part of the history of jazz radio, that not only you play the music, you talk a little bit about the artist of the music, because one of the greatest aspects of jazz is not only the music, it's the lore, the legends behind it, the stories of the artists and the music. So the key is how to be as brief as possible. Brevity reigns supreme, to give a little backstory or a little bit of something about what they just heard, and continue. We don't want to play a big band and sit there and read the entire big band, you know, first, second, third chair, etc., etc. Our policy for on-air host is in a set of music. Pick one of the songs of the three, because we don't allow more than a 3-song set to occur. And out of that one highlight of those 3 songs, that's the one that you talk a little bit more about it, other than just the artist and the song title. So that's the key. You have to learn, and it's an ongoing process of keeping the chatter to a minimum. You do inject a little bit of backstory to what you just played. It also allows the host's personality to come through, because we are still a personality-driven format, I believe, and that's what distinguishes us from an online service.
Jim, you've seen a lot of change, I would think, over the years of your career, the 30 years at Jazz After Hours, and still, is this changed at all? Do people, younger listeners, value the voice of the DJ? Do they want those comments? Do they want that talk?
I think they do. I think that's the thing that sets us apart from Spotify and similar sort of internet services, Pandora and so on and so forth. I do enjoy some internet radio, and I do discover some music listening to internet radio sometimes, if they're not just playing the hits. And I'm always jumping to the scroll to say, what is this? What is this? I haven't heard this before. I noticed that particularly on a couple of more contemporary classical music channels. So when I go to them, it's where I discover some new music. But the classic role of the radio DJ, I mean, that's what inspired me to get into radio in the first place. It was the late night DJ, coming in from several cities away, from several states away in many cases. So that was always a beautiful thing to discover, that coming from someplace else and getting a taste of something coming from somewhere exotic like New Orleans or something like that. It was one of my great inspirations, was a New Orleans DJ in my early years. But yeah, the commentary, and as Arturo says, the little tidbits of information about the artists. That's how I learned about jazz in the first place, was listening to late night radio, as you know, the radio in the middle of the night kind of thing. It's a beautiful thing.
Katie, are we getting younger program hosts who are equally knowledgeable as Jim or Arturo, as the veterans who can add value by talking about the music?
You know, I don't know that I'm qualified to answer that. I think for Jazz Night, obviously, we're extremely excited to have Christian McBride as our host, who is obviously incredibly knowledgeable. And to answer the initial question, I think it's crucial to have DJs and to have hosts. I mean, otherwise, why are any of us even on this webinar? Because I think there's so much to be added from experts, and then from Jazz Night in America's perspective, we're looking to Christian McBride to provide us with some of that and sort of some insider, look at jazz. But also, we're really, really focusing on getting the stories from the musicians themselves, which is sort of where we're taking the radio program right now, is that we're absolutely doing interviews with every single musician that we're featuring, and really trying to find out what makes them tick, how they came across this music, why they wrote whatever they wrote. Personally, I find that all to be very much value added. I mean, sometimes I want to just listen to music, but there's got to be a reason that you're tuning in, related to what we were talking about before in appointment listening. There's got to be a reason you're tuning in now to hear this and not just tuning in to hear something in the background. So I think it's extremely important.
Well, go ahead, Jim.
Two things that I think are sort of areas we need to watch on this sort of thing. One is, with too much talk, it interrupts the flow, particularly on what feels like a live set. If we have interviews between every piece of music, then it suddenly begins to feel more like a pre-recorded show where, okay, here's some music, here's a bunch of talk, here's some music, here's a bunch of talk. In a club, it's not like that. They don't do interviews between tunes, so it interrupts the flow for me on that sort of standpoint. The other thing that sort of annoys me that happens, well, it doesn't sort of annoy me, it annoys me a lot. On a lot of shows where there is talk about music, but very little music. Someone once said, talking about music is like dancing to architecture. It's better sometimes to let the music itself flow and go with it, and introductions and so on and so forth. When we listen to music in a club, we like to hear the leader say, this is a piece of music that I wrote last year when I was going through here, and this is the flavor I got of this area when we were traveling through it, and then play the music. But there's not a 15-minute interview. So I think we need to be concerned about the brevity of this and the fact that it makes a good point. The other thing is talking over music. I have developed, in years of sitting in nightclubs when there's a noisy table next to me, of being able to ignore that talk going on at the next table and focus on the music. It's not as easy for other people, but you have to be a dedicated pub crawler to be able to screen out that extraneous talk. And I find I almost have to do that sometimes when I hear a radio program and the piece of music starts and it's very interesting, I really want to hear this piece of music, and then someone comes in and talks over it. How about a radio show where every time someone starts talking, the music swells up and drowns them out?
Well, I'm going to play a little devil's advocate here. Of course, I'm a reporter for National Public Radio also, and so I believe in the contextualization and the interview material and, trying to tell the story about what this music is about. But on the other hand, we can look at the online radio services and see that they've become enormously successful without having any of our personalities, of our storytelling, of any of the context. People just going to listen to tracks, and what I mean is, do we recognize that is something that a lot of people want because they're using it all the time, or do we want to say no? They really want us to be chatting with them, and they want the personal connection. And I mean, what do you think about that phenomena of the Spotifys and the Pandoras? What accounts for their popularity? If what
Well,
we say,
what accounts for the popularity of fast food outlets? They're on every corner. Yet, it doesn't mean the elimination of gourmet restaurants or a better dining experience. There's a market for everything, and it's well known that for the majority of the masses, their tastes are not up to par. So you have to find your niche, and I like to say we're not a fast food radio station. We're the gourmet dining experience radio station. So we're not out there appealing to the masses. We appeal to our niche market and do the best we can for that niche market. And in this case, the niche market is those that do want to have a little bit of commentary, not a whole lot, a little bit, because attention spans have diminished over the years. That's the world we live in. And they do want a little bit more than just a continuous stream of music interjected as well with the local aspect of your radio station. So when you combine all of those things, and also the variety of jazz that we play, we're a full-service jazz station playing music from the 1920s, hot fives and hot sevens, all the way through swing, bebop, post-bop, soul jazz, right up into the latest releases. So it's a full experience of jazz, not just a narrow experience of jazz.
well said, Arturo. Then let's talk about this for just a moment. Is there a way to capture that less sophisticated audience that is going to the online streaming services and bring them to our gourmet platforms? How can we reach those people who are listening to Spotify and say, you know, there's more to it than that, and you can enjoy it better?
Boy, I wish I knew the answer to that. That's like capturing, you know, lightning in a bottle. That is the key. If one can analyze and get to the answer to that question, radio would be a whole lot better off, no question about it.
Well, Katie, are you... Go ahead, please.
I would say for me they exist side by side. They're sort of different beasts. I mean I don't have an answer as to how to get that audience, but I mean sometimes I want to listen to Spotify and I just want to have music on. Sometimes I want to listen to the radio and I want to have a DJ or a host giving me little bits of information, and sometimes I want to listen to something that's much more curated and much more contextual. So I feel like for me, and this is very personal, this is not you know, an approach that we're taking. It's just that they're all valuable and all different, and I would hope that one would not replace any of the others.
Well, is there a discussion at NPR about, you know, trying to grow the general NPR audience from the source of those people who are, you know, using the services? Is that anything that goes on at some level?
You know, I'm sure it has. I haven't been involved in any of those conversations exactly, but I think there is definitely conversations and thoughts about. We know there are jazz fans, diehard jazz fans out there. We know that this is really valuable and important music to be putting out. How can we make sure everybody who might enjoy this knows about it and, you know, and is sort of listening, whether it's on the radio or online?
Jim, you wanted to jump in? Jim,
I want to say, yeah.
You were about to jump in?
Well, no, I do. I agree, Katie. I think they're all important and different moods at different times too. The same people will use different services as I do. I think we're in a bit of trouble here with the huge emphasis on talk radio currently. It seems like increasingly radio to more and more people is a continuous stream of talk. And where is the music? I think radio is supremely suitable for music, for delivering music. And that was, you know, part of its original concept was be able to deliver music in that fashion. And this, I'm a little concerned about the future of music on radio in the overall, in the big picture. I see a de-emphasis on it. Certainly public radio over the years has decreased its amount of music carriage and gone more and more to talk. I don't know. Is the dumbing down of American culture responsible for this? I think it is, in part. People don't value music as much as they used to in earlier generations. I'm really sorry to see it, and I don't know what we can do to encourage more music on radio and encourage people to listen to music that has real substance to it. It's more popular music trends seem to be driven more by personalities than by content, by musical content. And what can we do about that?
I think it's also a struggle just the way people consume music these days, in the same way, in many ways, that they consume news, where you can sort of get your particular news delivered, you know, to your Facebook page or to your Twitter feed the way you want it. It does seem to be more of a struggle to ask people to stay with a host or a DJ for a few hours and listen to what that host or DJ is in the mood to play for those hours, instead of sort of an on-demand aspect. I agree. I think that's a big problem. I don't know what to do about that.
Well, I think you'll like this comment from Kerry Gaffney, who says, I listen to radio for the DJ personality and the music. Oh, to me, the DJ is an artist, just like the musician is. So that should be a little validation for you folks. Let me,
if I may quote Duke Ellington, he, in referring to radio hosts, he called them the purveyors of swirls.
The purveyors of swirls.
Swirls, the records. Remember that you
okay.
Purveyors of swirls.
Let me remind our attendees that you're listening to Talking Jazz. You're viewing it. This is the Jazz Journalists Association's webinar series. We're talking to Jim Wilkie, Arturo Gómez, and Katie Simon about tuning into the future of jazz radio. I have a comment, and this Talking Jazz webinar is brought to you by the Jazz Cruise through its Anita E. Berry Educational Fund. I have a comment from Jeremy Gossett, who is a producer of a series called Backstage Jazz. He says, I found the combination of live performances and interviews with the artists are a good combination, and part of our job as jazz journalists is to dig deeper into the music. The discussion about terrestrial radio transition to all streaming/digital signals versus streaming on demand is a question for producers marketing these programs. What are your thoughts? Jeremy wants to know about marketing programs such as his own, Backstage Jazz. Is this something that can be accommodated by the transitions in the formats?
There is something that we haven't discussed that I think should be brought up. Programs like Katie's program, Jazz Night in America, where the recordings are all original recordings done at the source, those programs can be circulated by podcasts and such. So they do go in that format, and they can go in that format. However, programs of recorded music, of CDs, you're getting into a pretty dicey area there with the digital millennium performance rights. You're not supposed to do that unless you have paid performance rights on those records that you're playing. So I think that's a limiting factor. I think a lot of people ignore it and go ahead and do it anyway. But theoretically, only those recordings that you actually recorded yourself can be podcast, actually. Comments?
And, I don't know where that goes. People?
I'm not qualified in this particular subject. That's not my field.
Yeah, me neither. Marketing, I'm content.
Well, let's talk about the content of shows that are being produced independently. I know Jeremy's worked very hard on Backstage Jazz and has worked very hard to market it to independent stations, whether they're members of the PRI or the NPR families or not. Do you think that there is a market for independently produced shows, or are they inevitably going to come from a powerhouse such as NPR in collaboration with a powerhouse station like BGO or KUV or maybe KPL, or I mean, are those kinds of synergies keeping creative radio producers out of the mix? Is it limiting the ability to get online unless you go to a podcast?
Well,
not to get online, to get heard.
For instance, we're broadcasting Katie's Jazz Night in America, and in its initial, 3 weeks, a month, 5 weeks that we've been broadcasting it, it's been very well received. We also broadcast Jim Cullen's Live from the Landing, which is a PRI show, and that's one of our staple satellite programs that we've had for 20 years. Others have come and gone, but I think there's room for both independent networks, be it PRI and then PR shows. It's not about where it's coming from, but the quality of that program itself. If it's good, it's going to make it to the airwaves.
How are you distributing Jazz Northwest, Jim?
I'm not distributing it. It is only on KPLU on Sunday afternoons at 2 o'clock. However, as I said, immediately following the broadcast, it is available as a podcast from kplu.org. We broadcast on this program, we record and broadcast national touring artists as well as local artists. We do the Port Townsend Jazz Festival every year. We often do some from the Earshot Jazz Festival as well. So we're doing both, but we're making no attempt to distribute it beyond the KPLU base of either on the air live and or the podcast which follows it.
Is it streamed as well?
It is streamed live, yeah, when it's broadcast, it is streamed. And we do hear from listeners all over the place on the streaming broadcast. KPLU is now adding to their station IDs 88.5 and streaming at kplu.org on all their IDs. So I think this is a national trend with a lot of stations that they are identifying that. When I was doing Jazz After Hours, which I always insisted that stations carry in late night positions, so it was really an after-hours show. I didn't want to broadcast at 10 in the morning. But one night I was playing Dizzy Gillespie's Night in Tunisia, and I get an email from a woman in Tunisia who says, "No, it's a sunny day at the beach here."
Oh, that's great.
A comment from Chuck Obachowski of WWUH West Hartford, Connecticut. And I think Chuck is somebody who's really served a lot of time in the northeastern corridor working on,
Shout out to Chuck.
Shout out to Chuck. So he says if terrestrial jazz radio is to survive, it must provide its listeners with a unique listening experience. As Arturo suggested, we should promote our local scenes and regionally based artists. WWUH gave musicians like Brad Meldau, Jimmy Green, and Wayne Escoffrey their first airtime, and we still celebrate the accomplishments of musicians with roots in Connecticut, the very soulful Connecticut scene. We've been doing live broadcasts for many summers from Hartford's Bushnell Park, where local artists open for national acts. This summer, WWUH listeners enjoyed sets led by the likes of Mark Carey, Ray Mantia, Ralph Peterson, but they were also treated to live music by excellent up-and-coming Connecticut-based artists. Since we recently began archiving all our programming, this year listeners who couldn't hear the live concerts were able to hear those sets at their own convenience. And this also seems to, I mean, Jim, I know you're friends with Chuck and Arturo. I mean, through organizations like Jazz Week, there are communications that are being afforded to broadcasters all over the country. Are we in a position where we're going to start promoting each other, not just ourselves, so that on Jazz Northwest, Jim Wilkie might say, by the way, when this show is over, turn to Chuck Obachowski at WWUH and hear what's happening in the northeast of this U.S. Jazz scene. Can we collaborate in that way to make this one huge radio promotional effort, cross promotion?
Well, that sounds very sweet. However, I don't think individual station managements would approve of that. Tune away from our station and listen to somebody else online.
Especially when you depend on fundraising in order to survive.
Yes.
But I think that's a noble effort that they're doing in Hartford because, hey, Hartford has become such a fertile area, especially for the young musicians. And, you know, the influence of the Jackie McLean, you know, tenure at the college there, I forget the exact name, Hart Institute, which has now been, his chair has been replaced by a Denverite, Javon Jackson. So the Curtis brothers and all these great musicians that are coming out of Hartford now are a real asset to jazz in the future as well as jazz right now in the present.
Are there efforts to across the board throughout radio to promote jazz radio? Like wherever you are, turn into your local station. Is that something that all jazz radio stations could get together on? No.
Well, we promote ourselves because we're very heavily involved in the community starting in May through the end of September. Every weekend we're at a different festival or cultural event with our booth there. Sometimes we're at 2 or 3 different events over the same weekend. So we do a lot of self-promotion, but I don't know, as Jim mentioned, how keen management would be about, you know, promoting other outlets. You know, you don't see that on commercial airwaves or on television, or you don't see Ford promoting Chrysler.
Well, I think we need it more than Ford and Chrysler need to do it to each other. Katie, when Jazz Night in America shows up in a new town, do you do something to try to evince boots on the ground? Is there an event or an attempt to you know, to touch down and to deal with people on a local level? Right.
Well, we haven't done that yet because we're only in our 3rd month. But yes, I think that again, one of the things we're really trying to do is make it a collaborative effort. And I don't know that we would always be able to have an event, but it's something that's, I think, important to everybody who's working on the show is again to really utilize the expertise of the people in the city where we're going, and not just sort of descend on the city and, you know, take what we can get and leave. So no, we haven't done anything like that yet, but I think it's a really good idea, and I think it's something that we're sort of exploring. We're in the nascent stages of exploring.
Did StoryCorps actually set up sort of a model for that sort of thing?
You know, in some ways, yes. I mean, StoryCorps worked very collaboratively with every station and every city it went to. It's a very elaborate collaboration that is probably, I mean, they would also stay for 6 weeks. So, you know, it's a very different beast. But yes, it's certainly in my background, this idea of, you know, working, really understanding where we're going, both the station that we might be collaborating with, and also the scene and the city, and really knowing what it is before we get there.
I've got a comment from Jay Edwards of Jazz Tones on WCLK, but I think it got cut off. So, Jay, will you please post that comment again, and I'll get back to it. Someone wrote, what about a jazz radio aggregator? And I think there is such a device or app that Jazz Boston was promoting. Forget what it was called. Was it Jazz Bird Radio or something like that? Do you guys know what I'm talking about at all? It was an app that had, I don't know, 100 or 200 stations on it. that you could get any of these stations if you went through the app. Okay.
So we have an individual KUVO app.
Right. Right. And again, that speaks to management wanting to keep your listeners for you, and it makes sense.
Absolutely, it's that aspect of any business or any broadcasting outlet is, I don't think that can be changed. I mean, we don't mind cross-promoting. If something makes the news, we don't mind saying, hey, our sister station in WBGO, Wilder Rivera has won, the Jazz Programmer of the Year award, or something to that effect, or Chuy Varela at KCSM. If something is newsworthy, it's not that we ignore that there's other stations, and when people call up and say, hey, I'm going to New York, where can I listen to some jazz? Well, we'll tell them where to listen to jazz and in the market. But, to go on the air and overtly, promote, hey, go to WBGO and listen to this program, and when you finish there, go to KKJZ in Los Angeles and listen to this. I don't think it's good business.
Yeah. Well, you have a dedicated station. I suppose if a station had one jazz program on it, well, they probably would be even less likely, management, to say, go ahead and announce another station. Yeah.
True.
I am getting another comment that says, we as promoters do that on our Facebook pages and Twitter, with individual shout-outs on our page to stations with hookups, tagging, etc. We promote the artists and DJs regularly with close to 8,000 followers. We always tag and promote the 500-plus stations we work with. That's Jazzbird. That is the 500-station app that Jazz Boston was trying to promote. So I think that probably includes KCSM, KUVO, KPL, and NPR.org, as well as BGO and the various NPR stations. But that may be something that you, as music directors or producers, are less eager to engage with than somebody who is working as an aggregator and marketer in that fashion. Let me announce to the audience that if you want to make a comment or you have any questions for our panelists, Jim Wilson, Katie Simon, Arturo Gómez, this is the time to post your questions and comments, because we're going into the last 15 minutes of this 90-minute webinar. So what could you speculate? What would be the best thing that you could have that you don't have now, Arturo? Or
wow, a wish list, huh? Yeah, wow, that's something I would have to ponder for a minute, but I guess I would like, if something easy, I would like to be able to offer on-demand listening immediately for all of our shifts, all of our specialty programs, the satellite programs such as Jazz Night in America. Well, you go to their site and you can listen to it on demand. But of those generating from KUVO, I would love to be able to say, hey, starting tomorrow, you can listen to any shift on demand, any interview on demand, any of our broadcast of live music from our performance studio on demand. That would be my immediate wish for the station.
Jim, what do you want most for Christmas?
Wow. I want a greater awareness of people of the richness of this world we call jazz. I was an Iowa farm boy when I discovered jazz, and I didn't know anybody else who liked jazz even. And I just discovered this music coming through the radio in the middle of the night, and I just fell in love with it immediately, and it's been my life ever since. I just wish I could pass that experience on to others, and that's what I try to do with my show, is to capture the imagination and to capture the attention of listeners who had never encountered this music before, not playing just to the fans, but still satisfying them as well. I think we all need to present the music with as much honesty and integrity, and present it as a music that is worth sitting down and listening to. I made a comment to you, Howard, when I was suggesting comments. If you can hear jazz coming from ceiling speakers in many restaurants, how come jazz stations struggle? I've never figured that one out. And half the restaurants I go into have jazz playing through the ceilings. I even hear John Coltrane coming through the ceiling speakers, and yet jazz stations struggle. I do not understand that, but I sure wish we could figure out what the answer is to that. That's my wish.
Katie, it seems to me like you've got one of the most exciting jobs in America in this way, you know?
Yeah, I was just trying to rack my brain while everyone else was answering, and you know, I feel very grateful and very lucky to be doing this. It's incredibly exciting. I think I want more time. You know, we're doing all new programming right now, and so it's been a big endeavor. So yeah, if I could get an extra 20 hours a week, that would be great.
Do you have a large staff? How large is the staff that's working on
that's a very complicated question, because we're in multiple parts. The radio staff is here at WBGO, and it's me, and I have two amazing part-time producers who are working on the shows, and that's the entirety of the radio staff. And the staff that is responsible for the webcasts is a few various video producers at NPR, and obviously Amy Niles, who runs WBGO, is involved, and Anya Grundman at NPR is involved. So there in many ways a ton of people involved in making this happen, because it is so multi-platform. But here at WBGO, it's Josie Holtzman, Alex Arif, and me, and all in this one little room together. So it's pretty intimate.
Alex Arif is another of the Jazz Journalists Association members. He's done a lot of work on our video not broadcast, but video YouTube compilations of the JJ Jazz Awards. So I know Alex well, and he's enthusiastic young worker, and we're expecting great things from him.
Yes.
So let me ask you what jazz journalists, other writers, photographers, maybe other new media producers, bloggers, can do to promote and to keep on top of what's happening in jazz radio. And is that important to you? Do you want that recognition from other sectors of the...
Absolutely. Yeah.
It all helps. There's no question about it.
I love seeing it when jazz is not written about or talked about as this thing that happened in the past. I think that's very important. Even though we might be delving into historical stuff in our program, just the emphasis on that this is something happening now, and this is something that lots and lots of people love and attend. I mean, we're working with Jazz at Lincoln Center. They're a partner in this, and every concert that we've recorded so far has been packed. So this idea that this is still relevant, and I never want to hear, I don't even want to hear the phrase jazz is not dead. Like, let's not even use that language, I think.
Would you consider, all right, let's turn this around a little bit. What could jazz radio do for the other journalists in the ecology and the hierarchy? Could you bring on jazz writers, for instance, to talk about something that's happening right now? Do you, bring on local critics to discuss the weekend jazz in Denver or the weekend jazz in Seattle? Is that something that might be useful?
We do that every week. We have a member of the JJA, Norman Provisor. He comes in every Thursday, and he has a 10-minute segment at 11 o'clock where he goes over the community calendar of events as well as other pertinent news in the world of jazz, be it local, regional, national, or international. He does it as you suggested, as a critic of jazz and as a journalist. We have that segment here, and then we post his jazz notes on the home page after he appears on the air.
Very cool.
Excellent.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, great idea.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Jim? Are you interacting with some of the other Seattleites?
Not directly in the show, because the show really concentrates on the music. I really try to stay out of the way as much as possible. I set the scene, I re-identify as it goes along, but it's really focused, as Katie says, on jazz right now. You know, it's not a historical survey, it's what's going on the scene right now. These are people that you can, I point out, that you can hear playing on any given night around Seattle, that they're available. So I think that's the thing that's really important for us to do. I do make reference, however, to articles I've read, to someone who's featured on the cover of Jazz Times this month, and references to new books which have been published recently, or I've been reading recently about such and such. So I do share that kind of information.
Can I ask you guys the difficult question of coming up with one local, in case of Jim and Arturo, performer with a, let's say, a new release out that our attendees ought to be able to pay attention to over the next couple of weeks of holiday listening? Jim, who's the Seattle artist, Seattle or Pacific Northwest-based artist, who's got a new release that you're enthusiastic about and you want people to hear?
Well, a whole bunch of them. One of them who was already mentioned elsewhere, Thomas Marriott, who is a wonderful trumpet player and composer and something of a catalyst on the local scene. Another trumpet player is Jay Thomas, who, as a matter of fact, I just finished editing a show with Jay Thomas that will be broadcast this coming Sunday, and it was recorded a week ago at the Seattle Art Museum, part of a series called The Art of Jazz, which is produced by Earshot Jazz, a nonprofit jazz presenter and presenter of the Earshot Jazz Festival. John Gilbreth is the executive director of that. So that's a couple of local artists and local tie-ins. We work with the Seattle Art Museum, with Earshot, and with many of the local artists. But this Sunday, 2 o'clock, or 2 o'clock Pacific time, or on the podcast afterwards at kplu.org, you can hear Jay Thomas in a full-length set, an hour-long set, playing with his sextet, some original music, and delving into some new treatments of some older music as well. So that's typical of what we're doing.
Thomas Marriott and Jay
Thomas. Yeah.
A
whole raft of people. The Seattle Repertory Jazz Orchestra is a local equivalent of the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra, and they do a lot of repertory music. And they have a new recording out of the Kansas City suite of Benny Carter that I recorded in concert.
Seattle plays Kansas City, all right.
Yeah.
Arturo, give us some local Denver cats happening.
First of all, I'd like to congratulate Jim, because due to Origin Records in Seattle and Cellar Live Records in Vancouver, we have gotten an abundance of wonderful recordings from the Pacific Northwest in the last several years. Not every single one of those releases are necessarily a Pacific Northwest artist, but they're coming out of that label. We're fortunate here in Denver that we have two very good labels as well that have given the country some wonderful releases, such as Capri Records, that has put out the Grammy nominee Clayton Hamilton Orchestra, the Treasures of L.A. with Barbara Morrison and with Ernie Andrews. And also we have the Jazzed Media label that has put out a lot of Phil Woods and Bob Lark albums and others, and those are two Denver-based recording labels with national artists. And then here locally, our wonderful jazz club, equivalent of the Jazz Alley in Seattle, Dazzle, they have their own recording label, and they're putting out a lot of recordings, such as what Smoke is doing in New York, of recordings made there of local and national artists. But the one recording I would like to see get national exposure is one that just came out last week. It's the final recording of the great Joe Bonner, the gifted pianist for Pharoah Sanders and so many other great recording artists who made Denver his home since the late 70s. He passed away suddenly 2 weeks ago, and he had just finished recording his first ever solo piano album on the Cherry Sound Records label, and right after the first of the year, that will be sent out across the country. It is just a stunning solo piano recording, and I think that's something that's worthy of national attention. And I would say the same even if he had not passed away. Joe Bonner was internationally renowned a pianist. And then we have a lot of great local artists here, such as the former Carmen McRae pianist, Eric Gunnison. He's got a recent recording. There's a lot of young musicians here that are putting out recordings. Paul Mulligan Quintet has got a new one. Colin Stranahan, who's now in New York, as is Rudy Royston, two outstanding drummers that hail from here. And so we have a lot to be proud of here in Denver, of artists that have gone on to receive national and international recognition, of course, topped by Diane Reeves, who's a Denver girl who still lives here, even though she can live anywhere in the world she wants to. And so we have a lot of talent here, and we're very proud of the Denver scene, especially the young cats that have now gone on to New York, such as Tia Fuller and others that have really starting to make a mark for themselves in jazz.
I want to make a shout out to my friend trumpeter Ron Miles also.
Ron Miles, yeah.
Ron Miles' album Circuit Riders, a new release. It's really happening thing. And Katie, I know you had tonight the piano edition of Jazz Night in America. Can you fill us in on some of the things that will be coming up in the season?
Sure. The show that I'm actually working on that will be going on next week. We're breaking format already a little bit. We're actually doing sort of a look back and a tribute show to some of the people, some of the legends that have passed away this year. So we actually are dedicating our next show to Gerald Wilson, Charlie Hayden, and Horace Silver. And I'm excited about that because we were able to delve back into our archives, WBGO's archives and JazzSet Lincoln Center's archives, actually, and we're able to present some material that was recorded that hasn't been heard in 20 years or so. And in addition to that, Christian McBride was able to interview Charlie Hayden's children and Gerald Wilson's children, and for Horace Silver, had a great conversation with Randy Brecker. So I think we just have some really interesting remembrances and conversations coming up, along with some music that otherwise, would have remained unheard outside of having been broadcast once or twice. So delving back into our archives, and when I say our, I'm talking about WBGO, NPR, and JazzSet Lincoln Center, is just something that I'm hoping people can also look forward to, along with hearing brand new performances. And we also recorded the Our Point of View concert, the Blue Note 75 concert in New York last Friday, which I haven't been able to go hear everything live because I've been here, but I got out to that, and it was really a truly incredible concert, and that'll be coming up early next year as well.
Pretty exciting stuff. So there is a future to tune into in jazz radio, and I really want to thank Katie Simon, Arturo Gómez, Jim Wilkie for being with us on this edition of Talking Jazz. This has been Talking Jazz, produced by the Jazz Journalists Association. It's presented by the Jazz Cruise as part of its Anita E. Berry Jazz Educational Fund. And besides thanking my panelists, I also want to acknowledge Joanne Kaywell, the JJA's webinar producer. Let me repeat the URLs at which you people can be found. So Arturo Gómez, Music Director of KUVO, and all of KUVO's programming can be checked out at kuvo.org. KUVO.org, based in Denver. Jim Wilkie has a new website. It's www.hatchcover.com, and that's for his Hatch Cover Productions, including Jazz Northwest, I believe. And Katie Simon.
If I may, it's hatchcover.co, C-O, not com.
Oh, I thought that was a mistake, so I added the M. Okay. Hatchcover.co. And Katie Simon, producer of NPR's Jazz Night in America. To hear that show and all the affiliated parts of it, check out npr.org/jazznight. So thank you again, Jim Wilkie, Arturo Gómez, and Katie Simon, and Joanne Cawell, and all of you chimed in. Chuck Obuchowski wanted to remind us that WWUH in West Hartford, Connecticut, interacts often with the Hartford Jazz Society, acknowledged by the Library of Congress as the longest-running organization of its kind in the U.S. So a salute to the Library of Congress and to the Hartford Jazz Society, WWUH, and all the great radio stations that are presenting jazz out there. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I'm Howard Mandel. Have a great holiday season. Our next webinar will be January 21st. We're going to be talking about jazz education and jazz journalism, and that's going to be. Yes, I'm sorry, I'm getting a message from somebody crawling on the floor here. But January 21st, relations between jazz journalists and jazz educators with Larry Ridley and Monica Herzig, reports from the Jazz Education Network conference. It'll be earlier in January. And I'll see you all in 2015. Howard Mandel saying good night. Thank you very much. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Everybody has to turn off your own connections because we can't stop the broadcast otherwise. So, Joanne's computer crashed. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Close out of here. Get out of this Google Hangout. Thank you.